It was a generation ago that Harry Truman said, and I quote him, "Millions of our citizens do not now have a full measure of opportunity to achieve and to enjoy good health. Millions do not now have protection or security against the economic effects of sickness. And the time has now arrived for action to help them attain that opportunity and to help them get that protection." Unquote. Well, today, Mr. President and my fellow Americans, we're taking such action 20 years later. And we're doing that under the great leadership of men like John McCormick, our Speaker, Carl Albert, our Majority Leader, and our very able and beloved Majority Leader of the Senate, Mike Mansfield, and distinguished members of the Ways and Means and Finance Committees of the House and Senate of both parties, Democratic and Republican, because the need for this action is plain. And it's so clear indeed that we marvel not simply at the passage of this bill, but what we marvel at is that it took so many years to pass it.
July 30th, 1965, President Johnson at the Harry S. Truman Library in Independence, Missouri, with the former president and First Lady at his side. Both the setting and the audience were intentional, as President Truman had tried and failed to pass a federal health care program. Lyndon Johnson had made it a central part of his 1964 campaign.
On September 1st, 1964, Senator Barry M. Goldwater interrupted his vacation cruise and headed for shore in a big hurry. Destination, Washington, D.C. He arrived just in time to cast his vote. No. Then he turned around and headed back. Senator Goldwater flew across the continent twice, almost 6,000 miles, to vote against a program of hospital insurance for older Americans. As he said in the Atlanta Constitution on January 26, 1963, "I've got my own Medicare plan. I've got an intern for a son-in-law." Flip answers do not solve the problems of human beings. President Johnson wants a program of hospital insurance for older Americans. He is determined to see this program passed in the next Congress. Vote for President Johnson on November 3rd. The stakes are too high for you to stay home.
Coming up, strategy sessions with key White House staff and members of Congress, as Lyndon Johnson works to create a central part of his great society and take the most significant step toward national health insurance in American history, Medicare and Medicaid.
First, joining us by phone, Julian Zelizer, professor of history and public affairs at Princeton University. His books include The Fierce Urgency of Now, Lyndon Johnson, Congress, and the Battle for the Great Society. Professor Zelizer, please describe the Medicare Medicaid legislation that President Johnson signed into law on July 30th of 1965.
Well, the legislation had three parts. Medicare A provided hospital insurance to elderly Americans who are over 65, paid for through Social Security taxes. Part B covered the cost of doctors' bills, and that was paid for by general revenue from the federal government, combined with contributions from beneficiaries. And finally, the third part is what today we know as Medicaid. And that was a program run by both the federal and state government, and it covered persons who are called medically indigent, who were not covered by the other two programs.
Now, the calls we're about to hear take place from May 1964 to March 1965. As LBJ works towards passage of this legislation, please describe for us some of the high and low points for LBJ on the way to approval of this measure in Congress.
Well, in 1964, after becoming the president following John F. Kennedy's assassination in 1963, it's a low point in that President Johnson really pushes for this legislation to pass. Of all the legislation, this was seen as the one that was most closely connected to the memory and legacy of President Kennedy, but he's unable to get that legislation through Congress. One of the principal opponents is Wilbur Mills, the chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee, a Democrat from Arkansas, who opposes the bill because he thinks it's too expensive and will strain Social Security taxes, and because the American Medical Association was still opposing this legislation as a form of socialized medicine. So, 1964, there's one big push to get the bill and actually circumvent Wilbur Mills. But in the end, Mills and his allies in Congress are able to stop it. The end of 64 is a high point because the election of 64 was key to changing the dynamics in Congress. Many Democrats who run that year, besides President Johnson, run on the promise that they will push for Medicare. Barry Goldwater, who's the Republican presidential candidate, is an opponent of Medicare. He's a critic of Social Security. So his defeat to Lyndon Johnson was seen as a mandate that Democrats could move forward with Medicare and that anyone who stood in their way was going to lose. So that's a really critical year. And then the early months of 1965, things fall into place. And the most important change is that Wilbur Mills, who had been the key opponent until 1964 of Medicare, switches and says he's going to push for a bill. And that's exactly what he does through March, when the final legislation that the House will push forward is revealed.
Julian Zelizer, professor of history and public affairs at Princeton University. His books include The Fierce Urgency of Now, Lyndon Johnson, Congress, and the Battle for the Great Society. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
We begin on May 18th, 1964, with President Johnson and his chief congressional aide, Larry O'Brien. The president had told Mr. O'Brien and Assistant Health, Education, and Welfare Secretary Wilbur Cohen to begin work with House Ways and Means Chair Wilbur Mills.
Mills told me that by the end of this week, he thought he would have something in shape to come down and discuss with you that he could present by way of a package that might be of interest. I told him I had read some articles recently that were a little bit disturbing. It would indicate nothing was happening, particularly in the Medicare end. And he said, you know better than to pay attention to those stories. And I said, well, I agree with you, Wilbur. I just wanted to be reassured. And he said, you know that you can't have everything you want. And he said, this bill, ultimately, he said it's got to have the Mills stamp on it. And I said, well, God, the president's view is that whenever you want to talk to him and that door is just wide open, he's just anxious and he's awfully happy to see you. And he said, well, you just tell him again, as I told you late last week, that just as soon as I'm ready to sit down and be able to present something to him that I can spell out that would make some sense and would represent a package I think that would be of interest, that I want to get a hold of you and make an immediate appointment. And now Wilbur Cohen reported to Henry. I asked Henry to get a hold of him this morning. He reported that there hasn't been any particular new moves in the committee, that they're still kicking around a little bit, that Mills is edging toward first of all, toward the end of last week, he felt that on a contract basis under any Medicare program that he wanted to have the private insurance companies be able to bid along with Blue Cross. Now, the labor folks got a little wind of that, and B-Muller came in to see me the other day, and they had gone up to see Mills, and I'm told today that Mills has decided over the weekend, he thought that over, and that was a little too complex, and he's kind of back in the position that he was in, and that is that Blue Cross be given a chance to handle the contract. But he's certainly in the Medicare ballpark. He's feeling his way along very slowly and carefully, and he's manipulating and maneuvering, but he isn't pinning anything down that can't be unwound. And I think we just have to have confidence in him to be contacting us by the end of this week for this long-awaited meeting. And Cohen says that from everything he can discover that there is no hanky-panky. They said that some of the strong Medicare supporters in the committee have been a little nervous. Al Ullman, for one, an awfully decent guy in the committee, talked to me last week, and he said, I just have a feeling that something's going to work out, but I get nervous because Mills won't tell us anything. So, but that's the way Wilbur operates, as you know. So I talked to him as recently as, must have been noontime today. But I would like to get him with a wrap-up on the thing and down to see on it, because I noticed these stories are starting to break out, in different directions and all kinds of interpretation of what is going on in there. So far, I'll have to say that the consensus is that Mills is going to come out with a Kerr-Mills Social Security package that bypasses Medicare. That's about all I've read. Now, Mills, of course, insists that isn't what he intends to do, and he says, after all, it's all in the final analysis. What does it contain? And he said, you and I know that my goal is to include a Medicare program into it.
I'll tell him tomorrow that I'd like to talk to him about it as soon as he gets where he can, and I sure hope that no action he makes no commitments until we can talk about it.
Yeah, well, now, he promised the no commitment end and told me by the end of the week, why don't I figure I'm pleasantly giving him a ring again in the morning, just touching base, hello, how are you, Wilbur, and sort of keep right on him, because it should be by the end of this week. He's reached a point in that committee. It's a complex damn bill, and there could be an ultimate price tag on this bill that of about $3 billion, I would think, overall, because they get into the increase in the cash benefits and Social Security, and I think that would be a tag of $400 to $500 million, something like that. Now, I had told Wilbur Cohen, I said, hell, if he's getting into something like that, no one fights those things, and as long as it doesn't mean he's using this as a handle to get out of Medicare. And he said, well, he's not going to use it for that purpose, but he'd like to have his imprimatur on that. And I said, well, hell, if you're going to do that, those folks ought to be getting those checks before election. And then on the Medicare end, he was talking about the value of the package at $750 a month value, and he said, well, hell, people could make an election, a single election, at the outset, and that would be irrevocable. And we will kick that around for a week or so, and my contention was that, hell, if it's a $750 package on face value, then an election to take cash, the person should get $5. They shouldn't get an amount in cash equal to the package, because, hell, that isn't. So now it's my understanding that that's the road he's traveling. He's figuring that the package he has in mind is worth in the open market, say, $750, and that the election that they would have at the outset, which would be an irrevocable election, would mean that they chose to take $5 in cash each month rather than the Medicare benefit package.
A few weeks later, Larry O'Brien calls the president with an update.
Hi, Mr. President. The Wilbur Mills situation has deteriorated. I would say at this moment totally. I had Celebrezze and Cohen over here early this afternoon. Mills killed a couple of hours in the committee this morning, but there was no action. He talked to Cohen following that and feels that he just can't put this thing together. He's suggesting why not vote out just a Social Security bill in the morning. He's going to have the final markup, and with an increase in benefits, that he wouldn't ask for any vote on Kerr-Mills and kind of put that over to next year, and that he can either vote Medicare, and which we'd lose, or perhaps he could skip that vote entirely. And why didn't we try to do something over on the Senate side with the Social Security bill when it went over there to attach Medicare to it? And at that point, conceivably, something could happen in conference and what have you. Now, I asked them just what they both felt that short of a conversation, again, between you and Mills, that there wasn't anything that could happen tomorrow morning except to lose this thing totally, that the best that would happen is that they not take a formal vote. It would require, that will require talking to Gene Keogh and others to keep them away from demanding a formal vote, because Keogh has been raising hell with Mills on inaction as it is. The whole thing is at a point where I think there has to be another conversation of some sort. Very frankly, I don't have the handle. I know I'm sort of just dumping a problem in your lap without the answers to it, but I think that perhaps what we ought to do is suggest to Mills, which I can do, that perhaps he could postpone tomorrow morning's meeting until Wednesday, that we talk the leadership further in the morning, that we conceivably even have Mills at the leadership breakfast if you think that's worth a damn, or we arrange for a conversation in the morning with Mills down here. That might lead Mills, it could be presented to Mills that, hell, Wilbur, apparently you're out of steam because you feel you don't have the votes, and you're talking about Watts and Herlong, and apparently you're right, you don't have them. But what do you think about having the Democratic members of the committee get together in one group and let us, you and I, Wilbur, put the pitch on them to come out of here with some piece of this bill? Now, we can do that or just try to avoid a vote in the committee and let them just vote the Social Security aspect of this out, and then and concentrate our efforts on the Senate side, with Mills feeling that conceivably he could be upheld. Now, it's a reverse situation. It isn't so much he would be upheld, but he would be in good shape with the AMA if he could convince the AMA that something strong was going to come out of conference, and therefore he would be the mediator, cutting back and helping them to avoid having them have a debacle in conference. The whole thing, therefore, adds up to a pretty dismal situation as of this moment, and I thought I should, number one, report it to you. I'm sorry that I don't have specific suggestions that would be meaningful at this point on the corrective end of it, but I did want you, if you would, advise me on just what you think of this, we could possibly do at this point.
I guess the best thing is just to let him go on and vote out Social Security and pass it in the House and see if we can add the other on in the Senate.
President Johnson and his chief congressional aide Larry O'Brien on June 22, 1964. We fast forward now to September 24th, as a conference committee works to resolve the differences between Senate and House versions of the bill. Louisiana Democratic Senator Russell Long calls the president to tell him the state of play in the committee. He mentions Senate Finance Chair Harry Byrd and Democratic members Albert Gore Sr. and Clinton Anderson.
I had a minute, but I held some folks out of here. I wanted to find out, they told me y'all broke up this afternoon. Did you make any progress?
Mr. President, God, I don't like the way things are going. I thought when Wilbur Mills undertook to talk to us for a couple of days as though he's going to do something, that meant that he's willing to do what he's talking about, you see? And so I was just riding on cloud nine, figured we were going to settle this Medicare thing and get it out of our hair and get it behind us. But then, now to date, after I talked to you, I've been out campaigning for votes. And frankly, I've got a majority. I've got 40 senators ready to vote for me to make me the whip when Humphrey gets moved up to his job. But I left that thing with Anderson and Gore, understanding that, see, I can't leave my proxy with him because Harry Byrd will figure I double-crossed him if I did that. So the only thing I can do is just to be there when the vote occurs and say, send for me when you need me. But anyway, I've been voting me and Smellis, or they've been sitting there with a proxy for me and Smellis to hang on in the event that we had to do this. Now, Wilbur said something to me this morning that sounded like he just wasn't planning to take anything. He said you've got to divorce it completely from Social Security, otherwise it can't be considered.
Later that day, the president gets an update about the conference committee from House Majority Whip Hale Boggs.
Yes, Hale. I just wanted to ask you what happened in Social Security. Is Wilbur going to give it to us again?
Well, I'm afraid so. What happened was that we were within a hair's breadth of having the thing agreed to, and Clint Anderson, God bless him, not knowing Mills and what a devious guy he is, says, well, now, we better check on whether or not this thing is germane, whether it's subject to a point of order. And I said to myself, Christ almighty, that's all he needs to get off the hook. And sure enough, he comes back at 2:30 this afternoon and says he thought it's excellent and that it may be subject to a point of order. In the meantime, I talked with McCormick, and I know we get a rule whether it's subject to a point of order or not, see? And it ended up, I just told him, I said, well, we're just going to fight the thing out, Mr. Chairman. The idea of you taking this course is you think it's reprehensible to get a rule. I think it's reprehensible for you to act the way you act. And we
we ended up, the way we ended was that they are going to draft something, but he's giving us all this baloney about not going to the Rules Committee to wake on the Chavinus, and this is just a way to get out. That's all. So I'll tell you this: I think if we don't take some part of Medicare, then we ought to abandon the whole damn bill. I don't think we ought to pass any part of it. Okay. All right. Okay, Mr. President.
President Johnson and House Majority Whip Hale Boggs on September 24, 1964. 3 days after President Johnson's landslide election victory and Medicare's fate still undecided, the president calls activist and pediatrician Benjamin Spock, who's been an outspoken supporter.
You might be interested that on ABC yesterday we taped my half of a half-hour bit for Medicare, which ABC is putting on Sunday afternoon. So,
I'll watch it.
Going on to the next step.
Do you remember what program it's on, what they call it?
It's something in issues.
Answers and Issues. Issues and Answers.
For Sunday afternoon. You'd be interested, first they had ex-President Annis of the AMA to take the other half of the program, and when he found that I was going to do the other half, he or the AMA withdrew it. And they said that they didn't want the country to get the impression that the medical profession was split on this issue. And then they got, ABC got Senator Tower of Texas, and he called him, this was to be taped yesterday afternoon. Then when Tower called up ABC yesterday morning and said that Texas was a shambles and he couldn't come up to do it. Well, they finally got Congressman Curtis, and he was doing it sometime today. He's doing the tape today.
That is very, very interesting, and I'm so grateful to you for doing it, and I want to thank you again for your wonderful help in the campaign.
Thanks for calling.
And I'll try to be worthy of your confidence.
I've got great confidence.
Thank you so much.
We move forward now to 1965. With his election win and a huge majority in the new Congress, President Johnson redoubles his efforts to get Medicare and Medicaid passed. And on March 23rd, he scores a major victory when the House Ways and Means Committee finally approves a bill. That day, the president talks to Assistant Health, Education, and Welfare Secretary Wilbur Cohen and House Majority Leader Carl Albert.
I think it's a great bill, Mr. President.
Is that right?
Yes, sir. I think you got not only everything that you wanted, but we got a lot more than on this thing. It's a real comprehensive bill.
How much does it cost my budget over what we estimate?
Well, I think it would be around, I'd say, $450 million more than what you estimated for the net cost of this supplementary program.
Now, what do they do under that? How is that handled? Explain that to me again, over and above the King Anderson, this supplementary you stole from Burns.
Yes. Well, generally speaking, it's physician services.
Physicians?
Yes, in the office.
All right, now my doctor that I go out and he pumps my stomach out to see if I got any ulcers, that physician?
That's right.
Any medical services that are MD services?
Any MD services. Now,
all right, now how do we know, what does he charge, what he wants to?
No, he can't quite charge what he wants to because this has been put in a separate fund.
Yeah.
And what the Secretary of HEW would have to do is make some kind of agreement with somebody like Blue Shield, let's say, and it would be their responsibility, under the way the chairman has provided the bill, that they would regulate the fees of, in effect, of the doctor. Because what he tried to do is to be sure that the government wasn't regulating the fees directly. It should deal with the individual doctor. And the bill provides that the doctor could only charge the reasonable charges, but this intermediary, the Blue Shield, would have to do all the policing so that the government wouldn't have its long hand.
All right, that's good. Now, what does it do for you, the patient, on doctors? It says that you can have doctors' bills paid up to what extent or how much or any limit?
The individual patient has to pay the first $50 deductible, and then he's got to pay 20%
of everything after that.
Everything after that. So that if you went to the doctor and you had a $1,000 bill, you'd pay the first $50, and for the other $950, you'd have to pay 20% of that.
But that keeps you hypochondriacs out.
That keeps the hypochondriacs out. At the same time, for most of the people, it would provide overwhelming proportion of their physician's costs.
Yes, sir, and it's something that nearly everybody could endure. They could borrow that much, or their folks could get them that much to pay their part, and even if they didn't have any money. Now, what does it get you on hospital and nurses' home under the King Anderson?
Well, under the King Anderson part, you get the first 60 days of your hospital care with a $40 deductible.
Yeah, all right.
40. Finally compromised on 40,
That's
Mr.
good.
President.
That's good.
And then in addition, it has the three other benefits that were in your bill, namely the home health services, the outpatient diagnostic, and we fixed that amendment up the way, you remember the way the Mayo brothers talked to you and me about. And then the only one change was for the home health services. That has to be after you get out of the hospital.
That's good. All right. Now, what are the insurance companies? Are they still raising hell mad?
Yes, I think they're going to go over to the Senate and raise hell on the thing, because quite frankly, there's no longer any room for the private insurance companies to sell insurance policies for people over 65 when you take the combination of hospital care and the physician service.
Yeah, okay. Now, I think that's wonderful. Now, remember this, 9 out of 10 things that I get in trouble on is because they lay around. And tell the Speaker and Wilbur to please get a rule just the moment they can.
They want to bring it up next week, Mr.
Yeah, but you just tell them not to let it lay around. Do that. They want to, but they might not. Then that gets the doctors organized. Then they get the others organized. And I've damn near killed my education bill letting it lay around. Yeah. It stinks. It's just like a dead cat on the door. When a committee reports it, you better either bury that cat or get it some life in it.
The Speaker is saying to me, he says he's way ahead of you, Mr. President. He's going to get that on the House calendar next week and get it going so the doctors...
Well, congratulations to you. Now, let me talk to Carl if he's there.
All right, thank you.
Yes, sir. How's little John?
All right, I think they've told you the whole story.
Well, that's mighty good. You're mighty wonderful.
All right.
Get them, Carl, get them to make y'all talk to John, y'all talk to Old Man Smith, and make him not let this stuff lay around until they can generate opposition to us.
All right. Yes, sir.
Later, he talks to Ways and Means Chair Wilbur Mills and House Speaker John McCormick.
Mr. President, don't you worry 1 minute about these doctors and insurance companies organizing against this bill.
Yeah.
Now, we have written the insurance people, I must admit, completely out of the field of people over 65.
Yeah.
But the AMA is going in all directions.
Yeah.
I have even had them, just in confidence, come to me at the last minute telling me they would accept the payroll tax if we'd use it to finance our program with the state administering it. Well, you couldn't have that.
No.
But they've come a long, long way, and they're going in all directions. Now, the insurance people are going to oppose it. There's no doubt about that. They were going to oppose H.R. 1. They were going to oppose anything we did. But they've got no more to oppose with respect to what we've got in this bill than they would have voted for anyway, without what we've done. The only thing I'm concerned about, and I'm very frank about it, is that there's about $450 million in this bill out of the general funds of the Treasury for which you haven't budgeted your situation.
Yeah, but I'll take care of that. I'll do that. You see what I've done. Wilbur, see, this will not hold for the rest of the year, but the first 8 months, by constant cabinet pressure, by withholding and just threatening and ultimatum and being meaner than you or Harry Byrd, I am under, this year, the first 8 months, $1,800,000,000 under what you appropriated and what I said I'd spend. Now, I think that I'll at least get down to where I'll be $400 or $500 million under that. That's number one. Number two, my deficit in the budget I sent you January is $1 billion under my deficit last year. And I've reduced the deficit, $1 billion. Now, I think that we can, when they asked me about, said you want to put in $400 or $500 million. What did I say about it? And I said, well, you tell him we had an old judge in Texas one time. We called him Al Caldy, old Al Caldy Robert. And he said, when they talked to him one time, no matter you the Constitution, he said, well, what's the Constitution between friends? And I say, tell Wilbur that $400 million is not going to separate us friends when it's for health, when it's for sickness, because there's It's a greater demand, and I know it. And for this bill than all the other program put together. I know that, and it'll last longer.
Mr. President, if you would talk to Mr. Ackley and also to Mr. Gordon, they came to see me, and I, too, was concerned about the impact of the tax beginning
we are worried about that because it takes so much.
We minimized the concern that they had initially. We've revised our rates more in keeping with their views, and I think they're completely satisfied.
What they wanted me to do, most of the spenders said that I was not putting enough money in the economy, and I'd have to put $3 or $4 billion in, accelerate public works and other things, and I'd cut down. Now they come along and they say, well, you're taking a lot more out here now, and you're not pumping anything back, you're going to get in trouble. I said, well, y'all go see mills yourself and talk to them and find some agreement. And I'm willing to go on anything that y'all go on.
We've agreed, and we've changed the bill now to conform to their line of thinking.
Well, I'll get out a statement and congratulate the committee and congratulate you. And for God's sakes, don't let dead cats stand on your porch. Mr. Rayburn used to say they stunk and they stunk and they stunk. When you get one out of that committee, you call that son of a bitch up before they can get their letters written.
You know that's the way I practice.
I sure do. I know where you learned it.
We're going third.
Let me talk to speaker now.
Yeah, all right. Here's the speaker. Thank you, sir.
Well, that's mighty good. Now, don't you let that dead cat hang around. Make them give you a rule, because Mr. Rayburn, you say, and the dead cat got out of the committee report it started stinking every day, and let's get it passed before they get the letters in, and we'll have a damn good record, because that sounds like a better bill, John, than we sent you.
Yeah.
Doesn't it to you?
It does to me, yeah.
I told him $450 million. You know, my philosophy and yours. You and I never argued about $450 million for people over 65, did we?
No. Well, where you been at these always going?
Okay, my friend.
All right, Mr. President.
For March 23, 1965, President Johnson, House Ways and Means Chair Wilbur Mills, and House Speaker John McCormick. 2 weeks later, on April 8th, the House passed the bill by a vote of 313 to 115. Senate passage came 2 months later by a vote of 68 to 21. And on July 30th, 1965, President Johnson signed Medicare and Medicaid into law. Harry and Bess Truman are the first enrollees. Next time on Presidential Recordings, the March on Selma and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Follow Presidential Recordings wherever you listen to podcasts so you never miss an episode. The Lyndon B. Johnson Presidential Library and Foundation, along with the University of Virginia Miller Center, have more conversations from the Johnson presidency. You can find them at lbjtapes.org.